Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. We begin with a weekly cattle report. This week, Iowa State University agricultural economist Lee Schulz visits with Sarah Moyer. He calls the latest cattle on feed report neutral to bearish and says he isn't expecting any surprises in the cold storage report, which will be released later today by USDA. From last week's Beef Stocker Field Day at K-State, certified Angus beef's Justin Sexton discusses quality considerations for the stocker cattle segment, reviewing his presentation during the event. In this week's Youth Development segment, Northwest Area 4-H Specialist Deryl Waldren previews the upcoming 4th Kansas 4-H SpaceTech Program with the Kansas Cosmosphere, focusing on robotics. It's all just ahead on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
This is Agriculture Today. An agricultural economist at Iowa State University calls the latest cattle on feed report neutral to bearish. Lee Schulz tells the K-State Radio Network's Sarah Moyer that placement numbers were up 7.4% above a year ago and 2.6% above pre-report expectations. He also isn't expecting any surprises in the cold storage report that will be released later today by USDA. Schulz begins this week's cattle report by looking back at the activity that took place last week.
Well, I think before we dig into the details there, maybe to set the tone for the week, this last week really was a week to let the market settle in a bit. The previous week, we've seen a $4 to $5 rally in cattle futures, and I think this last week we've seen one of the tightest ranges of those cattle futures trading. I think some of that is just market participants letting the waters settle a little bit, seeing if we do get a tone in the market, as well as I think we were waiting for this cattle on feed report to see what that told us as far as cattle numbers, and maybe that would give some trajectory in the markets. Also, when you look at corn futures, they were very much trading in the range they had been the last couple of weeks, so we didn't really expect to see much reaction, I think, in the feeder cattle report as far as reacting to the grain market.
And so now have we seen people moving now that the cattle on feed report has just come out?
Well, I think we'll be looking at the markets next week and how they reacted to the cattle on feed numbers. I think, first of all, let's point at the ones that came in within pre-report expectations. The on-feed number for September 1 was very close to pre-report expectations, was almost 6% higher than a year ago levels. The marketing number was very close to a year ago levels at just about 0.2% higher. I think those were very expected as, one, they were within what analysts expected pre-report, but really a lot of the marketing numbers suggested that. We look at marketings of steers and heifers this last month. Those levels suggested that we're going to see about consistent with year ago levels. And then the cattle on feed numbers, you got to remember that's the kind of combination of placements and marketings over the last couple of months. And with aggressive marketings, that's helped keep those cattle on feed numbers about 6% above year ago levels. The real surprise here, and maybe we shouldn't be talking about this as a surprise anymore, is the placement number. So placements were 7.4% above year ago levels, and that was 2.6 percentage points above our pre-report expectations. So even though really those placement numbers have outpaced what our expectations have been the last couple of years, we still are not expecting those placements to be at the levels that they are. One reason I think why those placement levels are where they're at is I think we're still seeing lightweight placements because of some drought-stricken areas. If you look at the weight categories of less than 600 pounds, is 600 to 699 pounds, that accounted for 84% of the increase in placements. All placement states were up that are surveyed except for Iowa, which I think shows that, even regions that aren't impacted, they're moving cattle. Why are they moving cattle? Well, we're seeing pretty strong feeder cattle futures, and I think that is triggering some sales of those cattle.
So, Lee, what do these cattle on feed numbers mean for the market here in the near future?
Well, I would say, we'd probably categorize this as maybe a neutral to a bit bearish report. Why not so bearish is because I think we've seen this in the last couple of cattle on feed reports of higher placement numbers, and it hasn't had really all that much impact on the markets. What I think we're doing here is really just pulling cattle ahead. And that maybe means a few less placements as we get into the next few months. So if we kind of look at what those futures prices are at today and not expecting too much movement here in the next week or so, that puts margins still red ink when we look at it from a cash-to-cash basis, but I think a little bit better than we maybe expected the last couple of months, as we've seen a rally here since August, which has helped when we project out those margins, especially into some of those deferred months.
What type of signals are we getting overall from the market then with the herd expansion? Is it expected to slow then by the end of this next quarter that's coming up?
Well, I think what we're really expecting, more feeder cattle supplies, and really that's what's being suggested by these cattle on feed reports. But I think also we are in the period where we're starting to wind down that expansion. That still means that we're a couple years off before we see smaller calf crops and such. But I think also, we've seen a few indications that producers are still interested in expanding. I was just looking at the Iowa auction receipts, and there is some sales noted for replacement for heifers. USDA AMS usually does that when those heifers are receiving higher prices than kind of their counterparts in an auction framework. So I think there's still some interest out there. We've seen some areas that have very favorable growing conditions, pasture conditions. So that has really, I think, helped support, some producers expanding. But overall, I think we're going to likely see reduction in the herd as we get into later part of 2019 and into 2020. But for now, we're looking at, very large supplies of feeder cattle. Looking at cattle on feed numbers are up 6%. Year over year, and that's really here to stay for the next 18 to 24 months.
Were there any other surprises on the cattle on feed report, Lee?
Well, I think the one surprise, and it's something that I'm really looking at, is the Iowa numbers. When we look at the only state that showed placement numbers below year-ago levels was Iowa. The larger feedlots over 1,000 head, we've seen placement numbers in the tune of 11% below year-ago levels. And then the smaller feedlots under 1,000 head, which Iowa has a cattle on feed report for, showed placements almost 30% lower than year-ago levels. That's an interesting number that I do monitor, because those are the farmer feeders that potentially could be walking the corn off the farm instead of selling it. And those numbers really can fluctuate. Last month, that number was up quite a bit. This month, the number's down quite a bit. And with prices of corn pretty low, I would expect that placement number to increase. I think we are a little bit early yet as far as weaning. So I think that's really a number I'm going to watch here the next couple of months to see where that placement number goes and see if smaller farmer feeders are aggressively placing animals. That's important because that's one more competitor, I think, when we look at who's bidding for those feeder cattle. And that could be another reason that we see support in the feeder cattle market.
Are there any other numbers that you would advise producers to keep an eye on as the fourth quarter begins in a week?
We look at, for a report coming up, the cold storage report comes out today. That'll give us a little bit of indication, I think, and I like to look at that report for the flow of product, especially for the export market. We've seen exports very strong, but that cold storage report gives us a little bit of hint at, if we're seeing supplies back up. I would not expect any surprises from that report as we've really been pulling animals through the system, and I think that's because we've seen such strong meat demand.
And to move off of the cattle market here just for a moment as we begin to wrap up, was there any impact or did you see any impact with Hurricane Florence showing up in hog markets this week?
Well, I think you're seeing some short-term impact potentially as, that impacted slaughter numbers, ability to move some hogs potentially. But really, we're looking at that as a much more of a short-term impact. It's really difficult to get the impact of that when we have a lot of other factors that are impacting the hog market as the trade uncertainty is still being evolved and the impact of that. The news of African swine fever in China, I think, continues to impact the market from a trade standpoint, just the uncertainty that's causing. And this is just one more factor that is impacting that hog market. And I think one thing we can agree is definitely adding volatility to that market.
Well, some good notes there, Lee, and thank you for sharing here today with us.
All right, thank you.
Once again, that was agricultural economist from Iowa State University, Lee Schulz, talking about the cattle on feed report that just came out recently, some numbers that are interesting in his state as well as for other livestock producers there across the country. Lee was referencing the cattle on feed report, which is released by the USDA. That came out this past Friday, September 21st. That report is released normally every third Friday of the month and can be accessed online at nass.usda.gov. Online through that USDA website, you can subscribe to receive these national reports by email as they come out. I'm Sarah Moyer, and we'll have more coming up here on Agriculture Today.
Thanks, Sarah. Again, she spoke with Lee Schulz, an agricultural economist at Iowa State University and a regular contributor to Agriculture Today. If you missed any of this week's report, you can find it online at agtoday.net. This is the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today. I'm Sarah Moyer out at the 2018 KSU Beefstalker Field Day. There are about 200 people in attendance and many speakers on the lineup. One of them here with us, we have Director of Supply Development at Certified Angus Beef, LLC, Justin Sexton. Good to have you on, Justin.
Thanks for having me, Sarah.
Your topic today, Justin, was quality stocker production considerations, and you hit a few main points on that topic. So first you talked about the changing weights and changing selling points for stocker cattle and how that's affecting the feed yard customer. Would you expand on that idea?
Yeah, as we see the entry into feed yards getting heavier as stocker operators look to extend that feeding period and spread those opportunity costs out, one of the things we look at from a quality perspective, we see that feed yards have increased competition and that quality grade has continued to improve. And so as they look to source cattle with the ability to grade, we spent time looking at what are some supplementation strategies the stocker operator can engage in to make sure that the next customer, the feed yard, has the greatest opportunity for those cattle to grade. And really a concept we talked about today was the idea of as cattle get past about 64% of mature weight, and if we think about the average feedlot steer, that's somewhere in that 825-pound range. For those stocker operators that maybe still have those big yearlings out on grass or thinking about how they would feed those cattle a bit longer, there's certainly some opportunity to increase the amount of supplementation and ultimately enhance quality grade in those cattle. Some of the research data would suggest there's no functional increase or not very much increase in marbling score, but in reality we see about a 40-point difference. And while that may not sound like much, that moves as much as 9 to 14% of those cattle on up into a quality grade premium of modest choice or better, which ultimately would garner certified Angus beef premiums. The other way to think about that I challenged the crowd with is the idea that not managing those cattle for quality functionally slides 32% of those cattle outside of the premium quality grade category. So if the $4 to $6 premium going forward isn't enough, the idea of a $13 to $15 loss is something surely for them to think about as they plan their strategies going forward.
And if some of these stocker operators are not the ones making those initial breeding decisions, how do you see them still making that impact, using what they have or making their purchasing decisions thinking of that?
Yeah, so the stocker operator that maybe buys lightweight calves and looks to put 200, 250 pounds on them, certainly supplementation is advantageous from a gain standpoint. We wouldn't see a carryover effect in the feed yard just because those cattle haven't gotten heavy enough. For those who are making those procurement decisions where maybe they're buying 6 and 7 weight cattle with the idea of an 8 to 900 pound outweight, that's when their supplementation strategy should look to make sure those cattle can gain over 2 pounds a day, whether that be via grass or the amount of supplement they're providing.
And a second point that you talked about was implants and some different perspectives on a good way to utilize them in an operation versus maybe one that's not as advantageous or that producers should be mindful of.
Yeah, growth-promoting implants is certainly a technology that offers some of the best return on investment in a cow-calf or a stocker operation for that matter. And what we've seen is we've got more genetic potential for quality grade in any population of cattle today than we've ever had before. And so with that, the idea that, well, if we maybe have enough grade in the cattle, and so some producers are thinking about maybe I can use a more aggressive implant strategy and pick up some additional gain without sacrificing grade. And so we talked a bit about some research that's out there that did essentially looked at just that. If we take cattle with a high genetic potential for quality grade and use a more aggressive implant strategy, do we actually see the benefit? And the challenge is they don't see an advantage in performance at the stocker level and functionally depress quality grade for the next customer. So the challenge is you use a technology that doesn't return any additional benefit by increasing implant potency and maybe cost the feed yard operator unknowingly future quality grade.
Some good considerations to keep in mind when making decisions about implants. That data is good to be thinking about. And one challenge that you sent off the people in attendance here today is to be thinking from the health perspective and having a final consumer in mind. What are some of those concerns that you hear coming back towards producers, and how does that help you communicating out to the audience here today?
Now, certainly the stocker operator faces the largest health challenge of any segment in the industry in that they aggregate a lot of cattle from a number of different places. And so the stocker is really focused on how do they minimize health challenges. And so the feedback that I provide from a consumer perspective is that we know that consumers are increasingly wanting to know what and how antibiotics are used in their food supply. That's apparent in poultry, swine, as well as beef. And so the challenge that I laid out to the producers to think about is not so much how they go about using antibiotics to solve production problems, but more so the stocker operator of the future will look to the idea of how do I position myself to prevent health challenges rather than coming up with the best solution to solve them. Certainly we want to make sure that we treat animals that are sick, but really it goes back to an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so the idea that I left them with is don't look for the next cure of a health challenge. Look for ways in procurement, feeding, and management that ultimately can prevent any additional health challenges that may become of those calves.
Now, Justin, you were also sitting in this morning on a presentation by K-State agricultural economist Glenn Tonser. He had talked about, towards the end of his presentation, producer expectations and what they're willing to pay for in terms of quality. Being someone who's speaking about quality stocker production considerations, the cattle that they start with, the producers, from what Tonser had been talking about, have to see it to believe it before they will pay up for high-quality cattle to start with. So what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, it's a great example of essentially until you try it, it's a bit of a hard sell. And so it really goes back to some foundational data when you look at the value of genetic information and knowing about the cattle is most valuable to people on the buy. And so if you think about that from a stocker operator's perspective, Sarah, when a stocker operator can communicate the genetic potential or even the management practices they have to the feed yard operator, that's when it has the most value to them. And so really the challenge is, how do I communicate that in a way to the feed yard that conveys the confidence that they can buy those cattle? Really, that's best done on a one-to-one basis, a direct marketing opportunity, or using auction markets that focus their efforts on helping communicate genetic potential and health practices. On the flip side of that, the stocker operator working with cow-calf producers to understand what is the genetic potential of the cattle they buy. In that, it's a challenge today to communicate health as well as genetic information. And so as we look to address what Dr. Tonser talked about, the idea of open communication with the customer is at the forefront. And simply buying the cattle on the hope that they will do well is not going to merit the price that the producer wants. It's much more, how can I prove to them, if they don't have the benefit of having fed the cattle before, what they can do.
It sounds then that networking, and especially for these stocker operators working with both ends, the feedlot or the feed yards and the cow-calf producers, they're right there in the middle, so it may be of increased importance to them, correct?
Yeah, the greatest challenge lies to the stocker operator because they are on the procurement as well as the sales side. And certainly that would exist for the feed yard, but the stocker operator is more challenged because the number of operations that they ultimately source cattle from and provide a service to the feed yard of marketing larger groups.
And would you say that looking towards the future, you were talking about health, but also from these other challenges, do you feel that technology and data will help producers, or will it be more confusing? What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think the opportunity, especially from a genetics perspective, really lies with a lot of prospect to the future. Today we have more technology, from EPDs to genomic testing, to get an accurate depiction of the genetic potential of those calves, a number of opportunities to communicate that information, whether that be Angus Link program or others, where they can communicate the genetic potential of those cattle to the next segment. And so that's something that historically has probably been a gap. We can talk about how the cattle are managed and how their health was, but really the genetic potential and that ability to communicate that is really on the forefront.
Well, thank you, Justin, for coming and speaking with us today, both to the producers here in attendance and also with us here on Ag Today.
Thank you, Sarah.
That once again was Director of Supply Development at Certified Angus Beef, LLC, Justin Sexton. He's in town here for the 2018 KSU Beef Stocker Field Day. It's in its 19th rendition. I'm Sarah Moyer, and we'll have more here on Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
This is Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. In today's agricultural news, the numbers in Friday's USDA cattle on feed report may have surprised some analysts. Gary Crawford reports.
Some big numbers again this month in Friday's USDA report on cattle feedlot activities, in fact bigger than most trade analysts expected. First, feedlots brought in just over 2 million head during August, 7% more than August a year ago. USDA livestock analyst Shale Shagam says, of course, normally.
We do expect to see, as things get cooler, producers start sending more cattle into the feedlots. But this was a rather large number.
And with August marketings under 2 million head, it left feedlots with a capacity of 1,000 head or more on September 1st with 11.1 million head, 6% above September 1 a year ago.
The largest for September 1st since the series began in 1996.
That implies a lot of beef hitting the market in 6 months or so, but prices expected to continue fairly strong.
Part of the thing is demand has been quite good for beef
in this country and in export markets.
We are looking at exports this year on the beef side to be almost 11% above a year ago.
And expecting another 3% increase in 2019. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
President Trump's Environmental Protection Agency is taking a step to boost transparency for the country's ethanol mandate. Last week, the EPA unveiled a website that tracks prices for renewable identification numbers, the credits oil refiners need to show compliance with the biofuel law. It also released data on so-called small refinery exemptions, the waivers that the EPA grants if a company shows that its obligations under the mandate threaten economic harm. The EPA disclosed the information as part of a new push to boost transparency around the renewable fuel standard and its opaque system for tracking refinery compliance with annual biofuel blending quotas. EPA Acting Administrator Andrew Wheeler says that increasing transparency will improve implementation of the RFS and provide stakeholders and the regulated community the certainty and clarity they need to make important business and compliance decisions. The effort also seeks to quiet critics of the refinery waivers, including some oil companies that have complained that critical information has been kept secret. Ethanol producers have also raised concerns over whether the agency is too freely handing out the exemptions. The waivers have stoked criticism from ethanol producers and backers in Congress who have asked the EPA to halt approvals and release more information about the companies that have received them. The latest in a series of listening sessions last week focused on how to improve the accessibility of USDA rural development guaranteed loan programs. Rod Bain reports.
The Secretary has given a clear vision for us to improve the experience of our customer across the programs at USDA,
including the Rural Development Mission area, according to the Assistant to the Secretary for Rural Development, Ann Hazlett. She was part of a listening session at USDA headquarters in Washington, D.C. Thursday on efforts to make RD guaranteed loan programs more streamlined and accessible to customers.
We've launched a major rulemaking initiative that is taking 4 of our guaranteed loan programs and looking how we can make really a common process and platform for applying for those resources.
Hazlett has public comment on the rulemaking regarding the guaranteed loan programs for community facilities, water and waste disposal, business and industry, and Rural Energy for America, REAP, continues until October 22nd.
And then we'll take all of that information and make some decisions that will go into an actual regulation that will be moving forward next year.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
The U.S. has a long list of issues with China, including many centering on agriculture. Gary Crawford has more.
It's tit for tat this week, or tariff for tariff. On Monday, President Trump announcing another $200 billion of tariffs on Chinese goods.
Because we can't let them do anymore what they've done.
The list of disputes, a long one. The U.S. chief ag negotiator, Greg Dowd, outlined just a few of the ag issues for a Senate panel last week.
They don't buy the wheat that they said they would buy when they became a member of the WTO. They don't buy the corn. They buy no rice from us. Their tariff on distillers' grain is 80%. Their tariff on ethanol is 70%. They don't buy any poultry from us. We finally got a thimbleful of beef in there. The grain sorghum thing is difficult, and we aren't selling them almost what we think would be $1 billion worth of pet food.
Meanwhile, after Trump's tariff announcement Monday, China on Tuesday announcing more tariffs on U.S. goods. Meanwhile, U.S. farmers are seeing tariff-related losses, but USDA's Undersecretary for Trade, Ted McKinney, and Greg Dowd told the senators,
we are taking some short-term pain.
But the benefit, if we get issues resolved, is enormous.
In Washington, Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
And finally, in agricultural news, in this week's Tree Tales, K-State forester Jaron Tyndall continues his series on stream processes and management.
Today's topic is biotechnical stream bank protection. Most of our creeks and rivers naturally migrate across their valley floors. As they move across the landscape, they erode the outside of meander curves and deposit sediment on the inside of the curves. When the stream system is in balance, the stream migrates at a very slow rate while maintaining its shape and pattern. However, many of our stream systems are out of balance and exhibit accelerated bank erosion and down-cutting stream beds. Biotechnical stream bank protection refers to a broad range of treatments, including cedar revetments, willow plantings, brush mattresses, and log cribs, which utilize living plant materials to reinforce the soil and protect actively eroding stream banks. Plant materials can be used as the primary structural component or in combination with inert materials like rock, concrete, and steel to help stabilize stream banks initially and allow the plants to get established. The underlying concept is to reduce the force of water and increase soil resistance to erosion by establishing a living structure of woody vegetation that will maintain itself over a long period of time. Biotechnical approaches are well suited for localized scour erosion and small slumps along stream banks. Most stream bank erosion starts with the stream eroding away the base of the stream bank, which creates an unstable bank slope that eventually collapses. The key to any bank treatment is securing the base. If the base of the slope is lost, the treatment used on the rest of the slope will be undermined. The type of vegetation needed to stabilize stream banks will depend on specific site conditions. Grasses can be effective at increasing the soil's resistance to sheet and rill erosion, but may not be effective in protecting the stream bank. In most situations, woody vegetation will be needed to withstand the stream's energy. Woody pioneer species such as willow, cottonwood, and false indigo that can root from stem or branch cuttings are commonly used for slope stabilization. The cuttings provide immediate mechanical protection when planted, and then add soil reinforcement and stability as they root and grow. If you have stream erosion issues on your land and would like to know what can feasibly be done about it, I encourage you to give me a call. Also, mark your calendar for a free educational workshop to be held on January 15th in Seneca, Kansas, where you can learn more about stream management and connect with professionals in this field. To register, please visit the Delaware River RAPS website. This has been Jaron Tyndall with the Kansas Forest Service, and you've been listening to another Tree Tale.
And that's a look at today's agricultural news. Agriculture Today continues after the break. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today. The fourth Kansas 4-H SpaceTech program with the Kansas Cosmosphere is featuring robotics. SpaceTech is part of the Kansas 4-H Science, Engineering, and Technology program, which helps youth learn how to build rockets and robots and explore space through astronomy. They also gain experience in computer building, repair, and networking. The 24-hour overnight experience at the Cosmosphere includes hands-on science-based programming for Kansas 4-H youth development and is designed to be an adult-child experience. K-State Radio Network's Sarah Moyer gets the complete details of that upcoming SpaceTech program from Northwest Area 4-H specialist Deryl Waldren.
This 4-H Robotics SpaceTech experience is coming soon later this fall. Give us a brief overview.
Well, we're very fortunate in Kansas that we have the Kansas Cosmosphere. So Kansas 4-H Youth Development and the Cosmosphere have been collaborating for a number of years, but we've reinitiated a new partnership the last couple of years. So this will be our fourth SpaceTech experience that we have done since fall of 2016. So this fourth one will deal with robotics, which is always a really popular program with kids and families. And so we will have a 24-hour experience from about 4 p.m. on Friday, November 16th to 4 p.m. on Saturday, November 17th. And the good thing about it is it's for 4-H members. It's an experience that adults can experience with kids. So it can be a parent-child, a grandparent, grandchildren, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews. We don't care, but it's designed to be an experience that way versus being a training. We'll be dividing everybody up into 3 groups, and then the groups will rotate. And some of the things that they're going to be doing in this 24 hours is we always get a tour of the museum, we get a planetarium program, and we also get then the digital dome, which is their version of the IMAX, but IMAX is proprietary. So a digital dome presentation on some particular space-oriented movie. And then we'll be dividing them into 3 groups, and some of the things that they'll get to do in these rotations are they're going to build a better lander. There's a hair dryer dismantling process or a experiment, a robot programming or an obstacle course. And then on Saturday they'll do things like they'll do a battle bot preparation. They'll have a junk robot arm, and then they'll make a catapult or make a motor. And then at the end of the day, they'll have a big robotics competition on the different things that they've made in their small groups. And so we will be doing lots of cool things for 24 hours at the Cosmosphere.
And this is a program that is on a first-come, first-served basis. There are a limited number of spots, correct?
Yes, we're going to cap it at 60 because we want it to remain hands-on and fun and experiential. And if you have too big of groups, then you just can't do that. So we're going to cap it at 60, first come, first served. The cost is $115, and that's for anybody present or attending. And so often parents will say, well, I'm not going to be doing the activities. Do I still have to pay? And the answer is yes. Chaperones will be provided they can be parents or the family members, but also volunteer leaders and also KSRE staff members may chaperone youth there while they're there, that 24 hours. We'll go through the Kansas 4-H Youth Development CVent registration system, which you can register online, and then the money will be collected through the county offices.
That website is kansas4-h.org, where you can find more information both on the event and how to register.
On the homepage, it'll be under What's Hot. There'll be a link to the specifics on how to register and everything.
That What's Hot tab is always a key place to look when visiting the Kansas 4-H website. Deryl, what kind of anticipation do you perceive that different 4-Hers have coming up to this event?
This is the 4th one in 2 years, so we've been doing about 2 a year. They're just little fun 24-hour events, and they get to learn and have fun, and it's small so that they really do have hands-on experiences and a fun time with friends and other people that they meet there.
And registration does include 3 meals, 2 breaks, and the overnight stay. They'll be lodging there for the 24-hour period, correct?
Yes, it's a little bit unique there. We do actually have people bring in air mattresses, sleeping bags, and all the things that they want to sleep on. So we actually stay at the Kansas Cosmosphere and not in a hotel. So it's kind of a camping experience, but we divide it up into various places where kids can stay with their family members.
A special experience for those who will be attending, and be looking for the registration to open online on October 1st. So you'll have a little over a month there to get in your registration and reserve your spot at the 4-H Robotics SpaceTech Experience. Any other comments about the schedule, Deryl? Sounded like there were lots of fun hands-on projects related to science and engineering that 4-H youth will be participating in.
It's just 24 hours, but it goes really fast, and they're rotating, and as I said, in these 3 different groups and doing all these different fun activities. So if folks have questions, they can contact me, Deryl Waldren, at 785-462-6281, or email me at dwaldren@ksu.edu. That's DWALDREN@ksu.edu.
Well, thank you, Deryl, for coming on and sharing about this unique experience.
All right, thanks. It was great talking about the Kansas 4-H SpaceTech Robotics Experience.
That, once again, was 4-H Youth Development Specialist Deryl Waldren. He highlighted the event coming up on November 16th through the 17th, a 24-hour experience designed for 4-H youth that are excited and want to be involved in this area. It is a special location there at the Kansas Cosmosphere in Hutchinson, Kansas. Once again, you can register online. The CVent registration system is on kansas4-h.org. You can look under the What's Hot tab there on the home page to find the link, and registration will close November 4th, so be sure and register quickly as there are a limited number of spots. Once again, Deryl's information, if there are additional questions, is dwaldren, DWALDREN at ksu.edu, or you can call 785-462-6281. That's been our 4-H segment for the week. I'm Sarah Moyer. You're listening to the K-State Radio Network.
Thanks, Sarah. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. This reminder to listen to the podcast version of Agriculture Today, visit agtoday.net, agtoday.net, or using an app on your mobile device, type these search keywords, Agriculture, Today, Kansas, and you'll find this program. By tapping the subscribe button, brand new episodes of Agriculture Today will automatically arrive on your device. That's agtoday.net. This is the K-State Radio Network.